My name is Earl Willis Jr. I'm from the Warren County Public Library. Today is April the 11th, 2017, and we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And today I'm talking to Mr. Derrick Huff. Mr. Huff, when and where were you born?
I was born in Livingston, Tennessee, April 19th, 1979.
Okay. So far you are the youngest person I've interviewed, so it's pretty cool. Do you have any parents that were, or any siblings that were in the military?
I don't have any siblings that were in the military. I have one brother, and he grew up here in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and he's stayed here his whole life.
Okay. What were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I went to high school here locally in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and I wanted to join the service right out of high school, and my parents kind of convinced me that they would rather see me go to college, and they offered to pay for college. So I went to Western Kentucky University, and I attended for a little over 3 semesters. Didn't do too well in college, and decided that I needed to leave college at that point and pursue something else. So I went to work at a local factory here in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And it was while I was working at that factory, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, that I decided this wasn't what I was meant to do. This wasn't what I needed to do with my life. So it was while working at the factory, I decided to make a phone call to the Marine Corp recruiter specifically, and joined the service in 1999.
Okay. So it says, which branch did you serve? You just answered that. It was the United States Marine Corps. Okay, you were you enlisted. Do you remember going to the recruiting office? Do you
Absolutely, like it was yesterday. I called a recruiter one morning after I got off third shift from working at a factory. I went to a phone booth, which are obsolete now, and put in a quarter and looked up in the phone book and called the Marine Corps recruiter. And I spoke to him very briefly. I had just gotten to the office, and I told him that I wanted to join the service, and he sounded optimistic about that. And good, come and see us and everything. And I said, well, can you see me right now? And he was kind of taken aback by that and said, okay, that's fine. Come on over. So I went and talked to him, and he was trying to sell me on joining the Marine Corps and this kind of thing. And I told him, well, maybe you don't quite understand. You don't have to sell me. I'm here. I want to join.
Yeah.
And I said, my mind's made up. And so he was a new recruiter.
Okay.
And matter of fact, I was the very first poolee that he had that he was going to put into the service. His name was Robert McGee. He was Staff Sergeant Robert McGee. And he got me through the process very quickly, and in less than a week, I was at Parris Island, South Carolina.
Oh, really?
Going to boot
Less
camp.
than a week. Yeah. So he was trying to sell you, and you were already sold, right?
Oh yeah. He was pulling out the tags. They've got tags that show you all the different aspects of Marine Corps life and the things that the Marine Corps can give you, and I'd already done my research and knew that's where I wanted to go.
So, what was the thing that you picked the Marine Corps over the other branches?
Their integrity, their tenacity, their strength, and honor, courage, and commitment. That's the Marine Corps motto, if you will. Other than Semper Fidelis, they're known for honor, courage, and commitment.
Okay.
A lot of people are fascinated by the uniforms and the mystique around the Marine Corps and that kind of thing. I knew of them as war fighters, as the service that was on call to get an impossible job done.
Okay. And so, for the people who don't maybe know, you said a phrase, Semper Fidelis or Semper Fi, and that's Latin for always faithful, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So that's people hear people say that, and maybe they don't understand it. So that was pretty. I think that make it hit home with you. Did you like?
Absolutely. And they say once a Marine, always a Marine.
Yeah.
I'm a retired Marine, but I don't think of myself as a civilian. I'm still a Marine.
Okay.
I may grow my hair out a little bit now, and I may have some facial hair, but I'm still a Marine, and I conduct myself as such.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll note to the people that's watching this he was 20 minutes early. So that's the truth to the fact. Do you remember what is your parents, how did they react?
Like I said, initially when I wanted to join right out of high school, they were very, they weren't interested in seeing me join. Although I was 18 and I could make a decision for myself, they convinced me otherwise. I was on a rocky path after high school and during college and trying different things and getting in a little bit of mischief, some trouble. And by the time that I made the decision to join, a few years had passed. I was 20, getting ready to turn 21, and they believed that it was a good choice at that point. They think that I needed a little structure, that I needed a little discipline, and it's absolutely what they gave me.
Yeah, because that's the one thing about, not saying going to college, but when you go to college, you don't have a discipline and a structure that you do in the military.
Absolutely.
And so, that was, you really noticed that, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Do you remember getting on the bus or flying to Parris Island?
Yeah, I took a Greyhound bus. So my parents helped me load up my things and took a Greyhound bus to Parris Island, South Carolina. And I remember it seems like they always take you in the middle of the night, so you don't see where you're going, what your surroundings look like. And when they get you off the bus and onto the yellow footprints at Parris Island, there's a drill instructor that comes onto the bus and very forcefully tells you to get off of his bus. And so you get out and you get on the yellow footprints. You don't know what to do, what to expect. No manner of preparation can prepare you for what happens and what transpires in the next few days and 3 months while going through basic training there. But it's an experience I'll never forget.
So was it kind of when you went through the Parris Island, when you were just like maybe a minute away from getting there, was it excitement or was it being nervous, a little of everything?
It was the worst nerves I'd ever experienced. Everybody on that bus is afraid to look out the window, but we're all trying to catch a glimpse of something. What's our new home for the next 3 months going to look like? We'd never met a drill instructor, so it was shock and awe from the get-go, just from getting off the bus and hearing the drill instructors with drill instructor right in your face and yelling and screaming at you like nobody ever has before, and you don't know what you don't know. And so that's the biggest fear factor right there, just not knowing what's coming up next. And they keep it that way, keep you on your toes.
Yeah. And then I talked to, he was a command sergeant major, and he was a drill instructor in the Army, and I try to have him explain. Can you explain? A lot of times we see in movies or television where they show the drill instructor and he's like inch from your face and he's screaming and hollering at you, and maybe some people think he's trying to be mean or hateful. But can you explain to him what he's really trying to do? Or
he's trying to break down the walls that you put in front of yourself, trying to break down the barriers that you had between you and your parents, between you and your friends, you and your siblings. He's trying to get rid of the I mentality. He's trying to get rid of the me, and make you realize that you're part of something much larger. So he's getting in your personal space. He's getting into your mind, and he's trying to get you to realize that you are not you at that moment, that you belong to the Marine Corps, you belong to a larger group, and that you're not going to accomplish anything throughout boot camp, you're not going to accomplish anything in the Marine Corps with that me mentality. So it's all about breaking you back down to your basic building blocks of you and restructuring you to think about we.
so it's not about, it's getting rid of the individual. I mean, here in the civilian world, everybody talks about me and I like this. It's the individuality is gone.
Absolutely.
Because when you're in combat, it can't be about you. It has to be what's best for everybody.
That's right.
So, do you remember your instructors? Do they make a good? I mean, did you like them or dislike them, or what do they?
Nobody likes their drill instructors, or you're not supposed to anyway.
Well, maybe did you respect them?
I remember all of them. My senior drill instructor was Staff Sergeant Thomas. My experienced drill instructor, or EDI, they call him, drill instructor Sergeant Graticos, and my what they call the third hat. He was the green belt drill instructor. You know, the one that you feared the most. He didn't have any duty other than just to wreak havoc on your body, you know, the whole time you're there. And I had fond memories of unusual experiences there. And what I mean by unusual is me learning more about myself than I never knew. And my drill instructors did that. And then, of course, the process of going through boot camp helps a lot, but the drill instructors themselves teach you about yourself and teach you about inner discipline. And I respect them, and I learn to respect them, not because of the way that they yell at you and scream at you and demand of you 24/7, but the example that they set every single day. Professional military discipline. The way they looked, their uniforms were always impeccable. No matter what they were doing, they were yelling and screaming and sweating just like we were. But they always had a presence, and they always had a professional appearance. I don't know a better way to say it, but I respected them because of what they knew of me without ever meeting me, you know, before. So. Now, I respect them very much. I've reached out to a couple of my drill instructors since leaving boot camp and since getting out of the service even. They're all retired now.
Okay. So, yeah, you probably didn't see any with 5 o'clock shadows or anything. They were very...
Always clean shaven, always had a fresh haircut, and I had no idea how they ever found the time to do it, because they were with us from sun up to sundown. They experienced long durations away from their family. They were with us and saw us 10 times more than they ever saw their family. Yeah. And at that time when I was going through boot camp, I didn't realize that. I didn't even think about that. But they did have families, and they sacrificed time away from them to help make us the best Marines that we could be.
Yeah. How did you adapt to military life in the physical regime? I know a lot of people that when they get ready to go in the military, they do a lot of running and push-ups and stuff, and that's important. But do you think, what about the mental aspect? Do you think that's really?
Yeah. Mentally and physically, I struggled. When I went to boot camp, I was 1 pound over my minimum weight. At 6'1", I was like 134 pounds. And so I was tall, scrawny, not much muscle mass. Most young men and women that join are weak-minded and don't have much experience in life, let alone with the military. But I gained about 20 pounds in boot camp. Of course, it was all muscle, you know, and then went to follow-on training at the School of Infantry. But before I went to the Fleet Marine Force to do my first job, I went to the School of Infantry. It was a little over a month long. I gained another 20 pounds in 1 month there, but they let us eat basically anything we wanted to. I gained muscle, but I gained a little bit of body fat too. I started to gain a little bit more self-confidence in SOI, School of Infantry, you know, while I was learning my actual trade. And showed up to the Fleet Marine Force in early spring of 2000, and it was a culture shock. It was a societal shock. It was a mental shock, physical shock, and I remember very clearly my very first week in the Fleet Marine Force, 29 Palms, California. After checking into 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, I was up at the barracks after work one day, and I think everything just came down on me all at once, and I was thinking, what in the world have I done? You know, what did I do? What did I get myself into? Because it's a completely different culture in the Fleet Marine Force. So much is demanded of you 24/7, much like it was in boot camp, but you realize much more the weight of the responsibility that you have. And I remember breaking down on the catwalk of the barracks. The catwalk's kind of a sidewalk. I was up on the third floor in front of our barracks rooms, and I just kind of sat down there on the catwalk and broke down crying. I mean, it was that much weight thinking about, you know, what in the world did I do? But it was after talking to a senior Marine who kind of experienced the same thing. It helped me get my head on straight and realize that, you know, it's not always gonna be like this. You know, the low guy on the totem pole, and eventually, you know, after training and gaining some experience, you know, you're not always the young buck. And you know, eventually you move up and things get better.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I struggled mentally in the early part of it until I gained more self-confidence and gained more abilities in my job.
Yeah. So you talked about your training. What was your specialized training? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
I joined as 0311. It's infantry rifleman.
Okay.
So I was infantry my entire career, although I took small stints away from my primary MOS of 0311 infantry to do other specialized jobs. However, I stayed infantry my whole career, which, you know, in the infantry you train to locate, close with, and destroy the enemy, and so that's what we trained primarily to do. So we, especially in 29 Palms, California, it's, you know, the largest military base in the United States. So we had great opportunities there to do just exactly that. Train. We did lots of live fire training on you know, fire and maneuver courses and ranges there in 29 Palms. We had some of the best opportunities there to train for combat that you could have as an infantry battalion, as a regiment. And we did what they call CACs, and now they call Mojave Viper. It's very large scale combat simulations, and was able to do that several times. And that was part of my growth, being able to do that kind of training, because by the time we had completed multiple evolutions of that kind of training, we felt very secure in our abilities to fight battles.
Yeah.
You know.
So as an infantryman, were you satisfied with your small arms? Were you satisfied with your equipment and everything? Were you satisfied with that meets your
Well, Marine Corp generally always makes a joke that we have to do the most with the least. You know, we have the smallest budget out of all the branches of the service. Of course, we get our budget from the Department of the Navy, because we are from the Navy itself, because we are a department of the Navy. And so we have to make do with what we get, but many times our equipment was hand-me-down. Okay. It was extremely rare to get new equipment. It was always used, always maybe a little bit beat up, but we had to make do with what we had. So you had to take care of what you had. Okay. Whether it's the gear that you wear on your body or the weapons and equipment themselves, we had to take care of them as best as possible. And it was widely known that if you did not take care of your gear, you know, there was punishment for that, either administrative or, you know, otherwise. But you know, just for example, if you dropped your rifle, you had to get down with your rifle and do push-ups. You know, you never dropped your rifle. You know, when my very first unit was 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, and so that was 3-7 was your punishment. If you dropped your rifle, you got down and did 37 push-ups. Yeah. You know, because your rifle was everything. You know.
And not to interrupt you, but I'm thinking about something. The people that don't haven't realized or maybe studied the Marine Corps, there's some kind of a poem or about my rifle. We probably can reckon you can probably quote that word for word.
There's probably a time that I could, and that was something that we did recite in boot camp. We didn't recite it much after that, but no, I have to say I can't recite that one word for
Yeah,
word.
that's a lot
but
to
it,
think about, yeah.
And that's exactly what it talks about, though. That, you know, this is my rifle. There are many like it, but this one was mine. And so you had a sense of you had to take care of it because your rifle was everything, especially, you know, in battle or in a combat situation. You had to rely on your equipment, your gear. So if you didn't take care of it, it wasn't going to perform for you when you needed it the most.
So you were using the M4, or was you using the M4?
When I first started out, we had M16A2 service rifles.
Okay.
And they were a much longer version of the M4. You know,
And M4 is more collapsible
yeah,
stock.
collapsible stock. And we didn't see M4s until 2008 when I went back. Of course, the Marine Corps had them before 2008, but in 2003, I had a M16A2 with all kinds of gear and equipment attached to it, you know, to use in darkness. We had, you know, IR lasers and those kinds of things, and that was pretty high-tech equipment for us in 2003. Most of us hadn't seen some of that equipment until we got to that point. But yeah, later on we received M4s and those types of things.
Like with a red dot sight on it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, the Triticon?
Yes, that's one of the brands that they have, but there are others as well.
Okay, yeah. So, you know, it's important that everybody knows, you know, that's your tools that you're using. So this is, you know, I know it's kind of important for everybody to know. So when was the first time that you left the States to go serve your country?
Well, I deployed before 2003, before the invasion into Iraq. We actually, the company that I was with, Lima Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines, we had an awesome opportunity to do some cross-training with Dutch and French Marines. And so we flew from 29 Palms, California to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we got on a Dutch ship, the HMS Rotterdam, and we sailed around Cuba and went down to the Dutch Antilles Islands, went to Aruba and Curacao, and did some cross-training down there. That was my first deployment outside of combat, and that was my first deployment anywhere outside the United States. So we got to go to, like I said, Aruba and Curacao, do some awesome training there with the Dutch and French Marines, and go on different vessels and do that. After that, outside the States, my next deployment was in 2003, and still with 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. We deployed in January of 2003 to go to Kuwait, and we went to Kuwait, and we sat in the desert for about almost 3 months exactly, waiting to find out if President Bush was going to send us into Iraq. And I remember many times and sitting there in the desert in Kuwait. At this point, I was a squad leader, so I was in charge of 13 men. And I made probably the biggest mistake, biggest boo-boo I made in my military career. And we just finished doing some training at night on AAVs, assault amphibious vehicles, which we were going to use for our ride all the way up to Baghdad. And it was late, actually very early in the morning. We finished training, and we were getting ready to bed down for the night. So one of the last things you do is get what they call an EDL check, your equipment density list. You get a check of all of your equipment, make sure you have it all, that you didn't lose anything. And right before we went to the tents to do our EDL, I stopped, and we had some portable bathrooms there, and I used the bathroom, came back to check everybody's equipment, and I checked everybody's gear, and they had everything, so we bed down. The next morning, get up and do the same thing, and I realized the night before I hadn't checked my own gear. And when I went to use the bathroom early in the morning, I had taken off my Kevlar helmet and set it down, and on my Kevlar helmet was attached my night vision goggles.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I realized it, I ran out to the Porta-John, and I couldn't find it. Couldn't find my helmet, couldn't find the NVGs. So I ran back into the tent, told my platoon sergeant, platoon commander, and so that started a regiment-wide hunt for night vision goggles, which was extremely important, not only because there were gear there, but we had local Kuwaiti contractors that were working at the camp. A long story short, they called in what they call a honeysucker to come clean the porta-johns. And somebody had taken off the MVGs and thrown them in the porta-john and taken the Kevlar helmet with them. And but I got them back and cleaned them up and dried them out, and they worked perfect. So, but that was one experience from being in the desert there. But then, of course, March 21st, 2003, we crossed the line of departure into Iraq from the southern border into the city of Safwan.
And so this is usually the things that I ask people, and I kind of hesitate because I take it kind of serious. I don't just say this. If something bothers you, you don't want to talk about it, you just let me know, because I respect that.
I'm an open book. You can ask anything.
So you're talking about going to Iraq. Do you remember your first contact with the enemy? And maybe I'll try to maybe help people realize that never been there, and I haven't been there, and so you have. So what is it like for someone to, what crosses your mind, or what is it like with somebody you realize that somebody is trying to take your life from you?
Well, we were always in a heightened state of alert while we were in Iraq, or while we were in Kuwait before we went into Iraq. You know, there was the threat of Saddam launching missiles at us, which he did. And so we always had to have our MOP suit ready, our MOP gear, which is, a suit that you wear in case of chemical and biological attack, that kind of thing. So we always had to have that gear close by to us. And when we crossed over into Iraq for the very first time, we were wearing our MOP gear and had our gas mask right by our side just in case that happened. And my very first contact with enemy didn't happen for probably about the first 12 to 15 hours actually inside Iraq, because we were buttoned down inside the AAVs, and our close air support was devastating the enemy. And it was only the first few days to a week that we were actually fighting the Iraqi army themselves, the Republican Guard. Because after they realized that we were basically shooting anyone who was uniformed, they stripped off their uniform and started wearing traditional Iraqi garb. So that made things very difficult. But within the first 12 to 15 hours, my squad specifically had their first engagement, which looking back on it now is somewhat comical. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just our very first time. We didn't know what to expect, but I got the call from the lieutenant over the headset that we were going to be pulling into an area, and we were receiving contact from small arms fire from a mud hut, and that's all it was just a mud hut. Most of the houses there were built out of compacted dried mud bricks, so there's not much to them. Well, we're always taught in the Marine Corps to lay down fire superiority and gain fire superiority early on, and that's what my squad did. And, we got out along with some other squads from another platoon and some other AAVs, and we started laying down every kind of fire we could on this mud hut. And it was an over exaggeration of firepower. We were launching M203, 40 millimeter grenades. We were shooting at the mud hut with M249 saws, with M16A2 service rifles, with about everything we had, and it was overkill for what turned out to more than likely be just one or two individuals with a rifle, and they weren't going to do anything to harm us. Hindsight, most of the enemy's rounds, 7.62, weren't that powerful and would barely even chip the paint off of the AAVs that we were on. They didn't have much oomph behind them because most of their munitions were older. That was the very first experience of an actual firefight for me and for the men that I was with. And then it progressed from there on. We received more fire, and we returned more fire from that point on, all the way up to Baghdad. We had several stops in between the northern part of Safwan. We skirted Basra, which the Brits were mainly handling Basra and the port there. But we skirted that and went to Numaniyah, Adiwania, and onwards up to and through Baghdad. And we cleared Baghdad. And once we had cleared Baghdad, we came back down south, and our battalion stayed in a city called Karbala. But the majority of our contact and individual small firefights took place in between Safwan and Baghdad.
Okay.
And they were mostly with small factions of the Iraqi Republican Guard. And most times it was very sporadic. You know, it was hit and run for them. You know, they would shoot a couple pop shots and then run inside a building. And you never know if there were civilians inside that building with them. Most times it was, you know, they would get away with a few pop shots. And unless we had a clear idea that there were no civilians in that building, we didn't even enter it, or we didn't even shoot at the building unless we knew for sure that we weren't going to, you know, injure civilians or children, something like that.
Yeah.
But,
So it's kind of an open experience to have someone talk about that, and so I really appreciate you talking about that. I think we talked on the phone, and not to go ahead, but you said you were deployed to Afghanistan too, correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So went to Iraq in 2003, went back to Iraq in 2008, and we can come back to that. In 2009, at that point, I was with the battalion, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marines, based out of Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And we went to Afghanistan in 2009, and the battalion had been to Afghanistan several times before I joined the battalion. At that point, I was a staff sergeant, and I was put in the role as platoon sergeant for a weapons company. So weapons company is still an infantry company, but they're heavy laden with larger guns, if you will. You know, we have a lot more tools at our disposal, from 81 millimeter mortar systems, 60 millimeter mortar systems. We've got heavy machine guns, Mark 19, which is a 40 millimeter machine gun. We've got 50 caliber machine guns, large heavy weapon systems, javelins and things of that nature that are normally for a weapons company mounted on vehicles.
Yeah.
And for a weapons company, we're mostly vehicle mobile, whereas a straight leg infantry company is mostly on their feet doing patrols and that kind of thing. So we were a weapons company, went to Afghanistan, and we were in very remote parts of the desert. We were on the border of Helmand and Farah province, and my platoon specifically was spread out over a span of about 50 square kilometers. So we were all over the place. I had a section of Marines that was stationed at Fob Bakwa. I had a section of Marines that was stationed at Cop Polar, and another COP, what they call it, command outpost.
Okay.
Combat outpost, excuse me. And I had to bounce around from COP to COP, or from FOB to FOB, forward operating base, so that I could spend a little bit of time with my Marines. But the road in between all of those COPs and FOBs were heavily laden with IEDs.
Okay.
And
not to interrupt you, but to the people that's watching this, IED would be an improvised explosive device.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is very deadly. That's where a lot of casualties. Can you maybe explain how the enemy would use those?
IEDs, improvised explosive devices, were used in many different manners. They're almost always buried. The depth depended on, how large of a charge that or how large of an explosive that the IED had, and what the triggering mechanism was to make the IED go off. But there were many different types of IEDs that were being in place, most of them by the Taliban or a faction of the Taliban or supporters of the Taliban. But they range from artillery shells that were packed with explosive and then rigged with a transmitter, and then they could call with a phone and activate that device, or they could click a button almost like you'd have on a key fob and activate the device, or many different methods they could use to initiate that device. And we encountered more than our fair share of IEDs while there. We had, like I said, we were vehicle mobile, and so we had to constantly sweep the roads that we were going on, because if the enemy saw us traveling that road, they knew that we'd eventually travel that road to come back. And so we tried not to take the same paths coming back. Some of the units that were out there were outfitted with mine rollers that were attached to the front of the lead vehicles that would help detonate. It would actually detonate the device before it got to the vehicle. Most of our vehicles did not have those. And in fact, when we first arrived in Afghanistan in 2009, most of our vehicles were just Humvees, which were terrible, and they didn't withstand a blast from most IEDs. And it wasn't until my platoon unfortunately lost one of our corpsmen in an IED blast, Anthony Garcia, HM3 Anthony Garcia. It wasn't until that point, although we had been heavily communicating with our higher headquarters that we needed larger vehicles that could withstand blasts, MRAPs, and those types of things. It wasn't until that point that we actually started to receive those vehicles. It's unfortunate that it took that event for that to happen, but finally we did start receiving 7 tons and MRAPs and larger vehicles that we could put out front that could withstand those types of blasts. But even then, if the IEDs were command detonated, meaning the person who was detonating that device could determine and decide when it was going to detonate, then they could potentially initiate that device on any of the vehicles in our convoy. So no vehicle was safe. But we lost, my platoon alone lost over 18 vehicles that deployment.
So can you tell people the differences between the terrain in Afghanistan and Iraq? I think about maybe the terrain in Afghanistan is a lot of mountains, a lot of rural open areas. Was that be true, or? Yes. And Iraq is vastly flat, and you can see for very far distances, and there are sporadic villages here and there. And the southern part of Iraq used to be very beautiful. It used to be very green and luscious. And when Saddam cut off the water to the southern part of Iraq, it dried up. And so it was just a dust bowl after that. But Afghanistan was very different. There were parts of Afghanistan that were very green, very lush, but it was large mountain ranges, lots of hills in certain areas. And then you had valleys that were very flat, very desolate. Most of the villages seemed to hug some sort of water source, stream, riverbed, mountainside, or in an actual valley. But we generally stayed in the Frauenhelmond province, which had large mountain ranges. Okay. Did you remember ever going through any villages like you remember seeing families and kids, and they're just like everyday other people, right?
Yes, and I think there is a common misconception about Afghani people and Iraqi people in many countries, and even here in the United States, and that the majority of the people in both countries are peaceful, and they are oppressed in one form, shape, or another. they are pressed. In Afghanistan, it's Taliban, and Taliban threatens villages to do their will. Otherwise, they'll go in and kill them.
Yeah,
They'll murder villages. So they are forced sometimes to. Some villagers are forced to implant IEDs and do that, or their family will die.
Yeah.
But I had great experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan with the general populace, and overall very accepting. And I'm sure part of that is they're seeing a large military force there, and many times both the Iraqis and the Afghanis, compared us to the Russians. Because the last time, Afghanistan had a large military force, and it was the Russians. So many of them are so cut off from the world that they don't know the difference. They don't know the difference between Russians and Americans, or anybody else in the Americans. They just know what they hear, and they don't have wide media outlets and TV that shows westernized culture, things like that. But most of what they're taught is that Americans are bad because we're westernized, and religions and things like that. That being said, overarchingly, they were very accepting of us and very open to even philosophical discussions, if you would, without being, because I sat down many times and more times in Iraq than I did in Afghanistan, but they were very curious about us. They were very curious about not just what we were doing there, but what we really believed, because they didn't really know what we believed.
Yeah.
But overall, the Iraqi people as well as Afghani people were very accommodating, very genuine, and we didn't have problems with the general populace in Afghanistan, except for the ones that were being told to do things and basically with a gun held to their head.
And I think I talked to my last interview, and that's the thing I think sometimes that people in maybe that's not in the military or even like law enforcement, they realize that not everybody wants to be your friend and have the well-being. And so by you seeing the Taliban and people like that were just murder people and just bullies, then I think we sometimes realize that there's people in the world that don't have our best interests in mind. And so by you and your military going there, you were trying to get rid of have these people just live normal lives and raise their kids without being intimidated and stuff. Is that correct? You think it would be correct?
Yes, and I do not believe that we were going there for to change these people's minds. Everybody has difference of opinions on how they should live, how they should worship, how their family structure should be, and things like that. And I think a lot of times once the people realize that we weren't there to change that, we weren't there to change the mindset, that we truly just wanted to help liberate them. We had a better working relationship, with them.
Yeah. And so, did you talk to your family much when you were in Afghanistan, Iraq? Your parents or your...
In Iraq in 2003, my parents still hold on to it, but we didn't have envelopes and stamps. You couldn't stamp something and mail it home, but they did have a service where your mail could get sent back. But again, we didn't have envelopes and paper and that kind of thing. So I remember specifically writing a letter home on a piece of cardboard from an MRE sleeve, meal ready to eat MRE, and a piece of cardboard, and you had to write free in the upper right hand corner so it could go back home. You had to have an address on one side, of course, but that was my quick way to write a note home, and that was while we were on the push up to Baghdad. One of the resupplies would come up and take that mail and take it back to Kuwait and get it home. My parents still kept that. I think I sent a few things home like that while I was in Iraq in 2003. 2008 was much different. There was very, very limited access to internet, but it was available at times once a month, once every 2 months. You could come back to one of the main bases and send a piece of email home or something like that. And I wrote some letters then. And Afghanistan in 2009 was a bit different. We had a little bit better internet access. Videos were kind of out of the question, being able to like Skype or anything like that, but was able to send some email back and forth. There wasn't as much letters being sent, but we did receive a lot of care packages. We were able to send packages specifically for the platoon, things that we needed, which were primarily socks, toothpaste, any kind of snack that was other than what we would receive in our MRE, noodles or, Vienna sausages, anything to break up the monotony of what you're eating every day.
Because MREs are not the best thing to eat, are they?
No, absolutely not.
So after your time there, do you remember when you left Afghanistan, Iraq? Do you remember getting on the plane to go back to the United States?
I do. I guess more vaguely than I realized, but absolutely do. And we had to take, of course, maybe a lot of people don't realize this, but even in 2003, flying into Kuwait, we took commercial airline. Going into Kuwait, and it was the same thing flying to and from for 2008 deployment to Iraq and 2009 deployment to Iraq as a commercial airline to and from. Now, at one point, we did have to get into a military craft such as a C-130, a KC-130 aircraft, something like that, to get from Afghanistan to a larger base, so that we could fly out on an actual civilian commercial aircraft. But absolutely, I remember leaving from all three of those deployments, getting our bags packed, making sure we've got all of our equipment, cleaning everything up, trying to get yourself cleaned up. From living in the desert, without real showers for 6-8 months at a time, and wondering if how you really smell, because you're used to how you smell after that many months. You're coming back to see your wife or your kids, and they don't care what you smell like. They're glad to have you back. So in 2009 coming back, we had a stop. Our first place we stopped in the United States, we had a bit of a layover, and there was a group there to greet us. There were some local VFW and local American Legion was there with some of their members and some home cooked food and that kind of thing.
That was
that was a godsend. That was amazing. There was much different experience than like when we left in 2003, because it was in 2003 to go into Iraq, it was still a hotly debated potential conflict that was coming on, and we were hearing about news reports while we were sitting in Kuwait that there were protests in Washington D.C. and San Francisco and all these places about the war. So we were thinking, great, is this going to be another conflict somewhat like Vietnam that's hotly contested and that's maybe not popular back home? Are we going to be coming back home and labeled baby killers and things like that? And so that was a big unknown, and we didn't really know until we were, well into the fight in Iraq that it was overall seen as more of a positive thing than we initially thought. And coming back from that 2003 deployment, overall it seemed like everybody was being welcomed. So that was a big.
That's good.
That was nice.
So you retired, correct, out of the Marine Corps?
Yes, I served just under 16 years. I always saw myself as a 20-year man or more. I wanted to stay in as long as I could until the Marine Corps forced me out. I was a gunnery sergeant, and I was being looked at heavily for first sergeant. I believe this was going to be my time to get selected for first sergeant E8. However, my father came to visit me the year that I was being looked at in 2014, and he came and he saw, you know, the stress that I was under and all the phone calls I was getting, and it stressed him out. So anyway, he asked me to retire, to come back to Bowling Green to help run the family business that we have here in Bowling Green. And it took a long time to think about it. My children at that point were about 3.5, 4 years old. I've got twins. I've also got older stepsons. But they hadn't really had to experience me deploying, and I really didn't want them to. And so that was one of the biggest contributing factors. Plus, I wanted to honor my father's wishes, and I decided to apply for early retirement, which was something that the Marine Corps and other services were offering at the time. It was called TERA, Temporary Early Retirement Authority. Certain MOSs, certain ranks were offered the opportunity to apply for retirement if you had 15 years of service or more. And so I applied, and the first time I was denied. And I applied again, and the night of our Marine Corps ball, I found out, in 2014, I found out that it was approved. And so then became a rush process to get all my paperwork in order through the VA, and get all of my medical issues documented, and that kind of thing. I am 80% disabled from military service, from hearing to backs and knees, ankles, you know, all those types of things. But I retired on February 28th, 2015, officially, and moved back here, and bought a house, 5 acres, and kind of in a very quiet area, very rural, and I enjoy the quiet.
Yeah, I can imagine so. Can you maybe tell people what you're doing now? You work at, is it Russell Road Self Storage?
That's right.
Okay.
My father's an entrepreneur.
Okay.
And he's had businesses here in Bowling Green since about 1991, and a property that we've got here in Bowling Green. He decided to strike out and create a self-storage business from the ground up, and it's been highly successful. And he's built that over the last 14 years and to what it is now, and it's a successful business. And my brother and my dad and I run the business.
Yeah. Yeah. So in closing, I always let everybody, if there's anything on your mind or you'd like to talk about, but what would you want the people that are watching this to take home from your experiences and anything that you had? If you could tell anybody watching this interview, what would you say? I
think military service, and specifically joining the Marine Corps, gave me a focus, it gave me a drive and determination that I would not have had otherwise. My parents raised me to be respectful. They raised me to work hard. They raised me to be truthful, honest, and they did an amazing job raising me. But there is something about stripping away your individuality and teaching you about service to others, service to community, and selflessness that the military service, the Marine Corps did for me, that I cannot repay. I attempted to do that after my first 5 years in the infantry. I wanted to give back to the Marine Corps, so I decided to be a drill instructor, and I did that for 3 years, and I felt like I was able to do that a little bit. I was able to put my imprint on new Marines and help give them that drive and that determination. And I cannot repay what the Marine Corps did for me, but I still try to emulate the things that the Marine Corps taught me. I still try to give back to the community. and Marines are a tight-knit group. A member with the Marine Corps League here in Bowling Green, as well as the American Legion, and through the Marine Corps League, they do Toys for Tots.
Yeah, it's Toys for Tots. Everybody thinks about that.
Great program.
Yeah.
I was able to work with them last year, and they helped out over 5,000 children. And it's an amazing opportunity, and I would highly recommend if anybody ever wants to get involved in anything. There's nothing better than putting a smile on a kid's face.
Yeah.
But I love the Marine Corps so much that I talked my youngest stepson into joining, and he joined, and he did 4 years honorably. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan himself. He was an infantryman, and I could not have been prouder at that moment than to see what that did for him, because it was also a complete 180 turnaround for him. He has such a drive and focus and determination that he never had before, at least not to the extent that he does now. And he's very successful, and the Marine Corps did that for him.
Yeah. It seems like you had a good influence on people. You made a difference.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, I just want to really appreciate your time, and I really respect your service, and I thank you for your service, and this has been an honor to sit down and talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.